Well, the eviction moratorium did, in fact, come and go, despite the Biden administration's attempts to extend it. It expired in most states earlier, but now this past weekend, the eviction moratorium expired in New York. And by some statistics, it does seem that now landlords are filing for more evictions than ever before. So it's interesting because it should be a big story, right? When the eviction moratorium actually was set in place, we were told that this would prevent all manner of evictions. And in the stimulus bills, there was money that was supposed to go either directly to the renters to pay their rent or directly to landlords. But still, most of it has not reached landlords, and landlords are fed up carrying the expense of a house that they make no income. And so will we see this as a landslide of evictions or not? It does seem like it in some communities, but it's really unclear because what's interesting is that the federal government does not track evictions, but it can slap a law on it, which does make me think that the eviction moratorium will eventually be litigated in the Supreme Court to its finality.
I think so. I mean, I think you hit on one of the big points on this, which I find really, really troubling, which is that we have no idea how many evictions. And the American Prospect did a great piece on this and how they missed the measurement. We have no idea how many evictions there actually are. There's no federal data on evictions. So we have no idea, well, how bad is it in my state right now? We don't know. But we can track everything else. God knows we were all over these COVID numbers, right?
Yes.
We have every other piece of data. But when it comes to affordable housing for Americans, we don't know. We really have no idea.
Which just shows how short-sighted this was as a solution to a global pandemic, right? During the lockdowns, if people couldn't go to work, then the federal government said, well, then you don't have to pay your rent and you can stay in place, right? But there still was an entire ecosystem burning and churning of someone who owns a house, maybe has a mortgage on it, with a tenant there who's not paying, who still has to pay for taxes, insurance, and expenses for repairs of that place. So there was still an economy in existence, but people could just stay there, right? So if the federal government actually wanted to solve this problem and not put people out on the streets, it could have issued reprieves on those property taxes. It did issue reprieves on mortgages, but it could have actually helped the landlords. They did not. They took eminent domain of these landlords and just said, you don't get paid from this. You get nothing. These people stay there. And was that the right thing to do? Because we reported just last week that in the newsletter, 98% of all apartments right now are rented and cash flowing. Right. So was this ever a problem, or was this just a way to punish small businesses by way of landlords in a way that the government is just picking losers and winners?
Kristen Swenson in our chat says, interesting that they can get data on evictions, but they're all up in the IRS. They can't get data on evictions, but they're all up in the IRS business.
They only really care, right, where that rental money goes. The tenant pays the landlord. Yes, the IRS is all up in that money. Absolutely, right? But there's no exchange of money here. Someone's on the street. Don't need to know about it.
Interestingly, in this data, too, the fact that we don't have any of the federal census data was, according to these reports, flashing red for a long time. Like, this is not new information. How many times have we on this show over the past 2 years talked about the coming eviction crisis and the affordable housing crisis? According to this data, between a quarter and a third of American renters surveyed back in 2020 by the Census Bureau, the census, which happens every 10 years. So the Census Bureau already knew this information.
Yes.
According to the Census Bureau, they lacked almost any kind of confidence in their ability to pay next month's rent. A quarter and a third of America, between a quarter and a third. That's really before the pandemic. So even before the pandemic, under Trump's watch, by the way, like if you're keeping track at home, which politician you love today, that this was on Trump's watch.
Yes.
That a quarter and a third of American renters lacked confidence in their ability to pay next month's rent. Nearly all of those protections and assistance programs now that were keeping even those people in place have now fallen by the wayside. And this, I mean, I think this wave of homelessness is going to come, but we won't know about it because I guess it's not a convenient statistic for our federal government to be tracking.
Yes. According to, so there's a great book about this entire system. I'd like to show you the cover. I know you don't like when I do this.
Just tell me the name of it.
It's called Evicted: Poverty and Profit in the United States. Since 1970, the number of people primarily employed as property managers has quadrupled. So this is a big industry, you guys, and it's a really hard book to read because when you think about people who live as professional tenants and they are basically professional drawers. They draw from either a disability or some kind of social security without any way to actually live their lives. And it's a really sad, like the whole system is sad. The government does not really help either side, the tenants or the landlords. And I think that it's just hard to see how this survives as a business because, did the government have any right getting involved in something like this when they can't really help evictions on a normal basis? This book was written before the pandemic and it was ugly before that. Yeah.
And who does well in these situations? It's Wall Street, right? It's these big hedge funds that came in and bought up one out of 7 single family homes in the United States purchased by hedge funds.
Yeah.
1 out of every 7. Wall Street swooping in and buying these single family homes. So Who does it benefit? And by the way, we heard from BlackRock CEO, right? We heard in those meetings where he said, we're just waiting. We're sitting on this cash. We're waiting for this wave of evictions and we are going to swoop in and we're going to buy up these homes. So it was just like vulture mentality. We knew that they were sitting there waiting to swoop in and buy these homes up.
He makes the point in this book that once upon a time, an eviction was like, it would destabilize the entire city, not just blocks, right? Because if ever someone was evicted, like people would sit outside and watch because it was such a big deal. The first time it ever happened in the country, in the United States, people were like, what is happening? And now it happens so often that there are businesses that are hired by landlords to come in and just rip everything out of an apartment, and it will go into this holding place in the city, and the city will hold it for a certain amount of time. And if these tenants want it, they have to pay to go in and get their things. And a lot of times they're not treated very well. And it's just like, where's my birth certificate? It's like jumbled up in boxes, and then those things end up in landfills. And when the eviction's coming, and you just keep living your lives. Like there are stories of these people showing up with the sheriff and the eviction company, the moving company, and like the mom's making rice and beans, still. And it's just like, you're going now. They just rip everything out. In this way, he makes the point that this displacement contributes to what's called a perpetual slum, churning environments with high rates of turnover. Because the link to a perpetual slum is that too many people move out too fast. And it's like the antithesis of the American dream, right? So evictions destroy cities, but we barely feel them anymore.
And we don't have the data to measure them.
Yeah.
So they're happening so much. It's destabilizing communities. It leaves families. And just think about what this does to children. You have a single mom who's got two children. Now they're living in a community home, or they're living in a homeless shelter.
Yeah.
Think about what this does to that child. You're really crushing a generation of children. Then they don't get to move. They're not upwardly mobile. Then they don't get to go to a good school. They don't get to be in the best school districts. They're in a homeless shelter. That's their family's address. Like, well, where do you live? I don't know, mommy. What's the address for the homeless shelter? That's where we live.
Yeah, it's very destabilizing to a family. It ends up, people will make friends and extended families around one person who, say, was considered mentally unstable and get some kind of disability supplement. And so that one person who knows that they have that monthly stipend will then bunk up with other people who can help them. And it creates these extended families living together in a way that's very discordant. Is that a word?
Yeah.
It causes discord because it's an unequal distribution of power. It's a really sad anthropology. And when this happens, it affects all of us. So can I have your power cord? I'm sorry. This was charging all night, but it didn't. Sorry, guys. Hold, please, before we move on to the next story. Thank you.
Robert in the chat says, I feel bad for the kids, but it's the parents' fault.
I think that is maybe a reductive way of thinking about it. I encourage you to read this anthropology. And I do think that in a lot of ways, yes, this certain population in the, I don't know what better word to use, in this like these slums, right, that are created as a result of this instability, they get so anxious and so stressed and so unable to make ends meet that they end up just like not being able to keep their lives straight. So it's like one of them will have an appointment with her Medicaid advisor or some advisor who, Social Security advisor or disability advisor, and they just miss it because they're just like, they get in this way that they cannot adult anymore. And it's hard to say that's your own fault for not being able to be organized with your life when you realize the lives that they're actually leading.
I guess. Yeah. Adulting though. I mean, as people want to talk about personal responsibility, I get that. Vampire Hunter says excuses.
I hear what you're saying. I do. But I don't think that I can empathize with that kind of life and then pass down judgment.
Yeah. Let us know your thoughts in the chat on that. Is it excuses?
It's so hard, right? Because you're like, you're a mom. Get your butt to the appointments for your children, right? But these are communities that are flooded with drugs and crime, and also have alcohol problems, and you're not talking to someone on the level.
And let's just also unpack some of the issues during the pandemic. I mean, think about what happened during the pandemic, right? We cut so they don't own a car, right? Many of these people don't own a vehicle to get to this appointment, and the public transportation routes are completely shut down, or they were disproportionately cutting public transportation, of course, disproportionately affects low income Americans. And so now we don't have the bus routes. They don't have childcare. What are they going to do to leave their child behind? You maybe can't bring a child to this kind of an appointment. So you're going to bring a child on a bus. Think about that. Just put yourself in their shoes if you can. I think empathy is a good thing, right? To have some perspective. Try to see if you can put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Yes.
See it from that perspective. But in the United States, we don't do that. We're so disconnected from other classes. From other classes of people in the United States that we don't see another class from ourselves. We really
that's
don't.
The thing. Like, it's like you assume if somebody is homeless that they're a lazy bum and they just should go get a job, but you don't. Right. Each individual has an individual story. I mean, there's been some interviews that I saw of some homeless people that through no fault of their own, they lost their job during the beginning of the pandemic. And this guy was talking about once you're homeless and you go to get a job, you don't have an address. You don't have things that they need on applications in order to qualify you. And then they go, let's say they have 5 people to choose from. Most people aren't going to choose the person that doesn't have transportation, doesn't have an address. So you get in this cycle that you can't get out of.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, you can't, okay, I made it to the appointment. But my address is a homeless shelter. Is that okay? Not all these people have the opportunity to go and take a shower in a bus station like Will Smith's character in whatever movie that was, where we get to hold this guy up.
The Pursuit of Happiness.
The Pursuit of Happiness, right? That's a great movie. That's not the reality for most people, right? They're not going to be able to do that. And I don't know. I just think having some empathy here, we just are having read that book recently, that Woke Incorporated book a few weeks ago, one of the great sections of the book he talks about is that in the United States we are so disconnected from class, we really don't know what the problems are among the other classes.
Yes.
And he said one of the ways to combat this they've had in other countries is to have this shared experience, like in Israel, for instance, like joining the military together, or in Rwanda after the genocide. Everyone comes together on Saturdays and they help their community, they help build houses together. It doesn't matter if they're wealthy or not, they all come together. And by the mixing of those people, they see the pain, the suffering maybe of the other class in a way that they wouldn't. In the same way, sort of forcing all of these, boys in Armenia to come together and serve in the military when they become of a certain age. It's not just the wealthy that get out of going to military service. It's everyone has to be a part of this shared experience. And I'm not saying that the United States should do that. Not a bad idea, though.
Well, maybe we can have a different type of team building activity besides military. Like, how about camp? How about restoration camp where everybody goes and works for the environment together? Well, or like, that's your military service.
I mean, the most successful program during World War II, during President Roosevelt, during the Great Depression, was the civilian, what was it called? The civilian, anyone in the chat wants to let me know. I think it was like the Civilian Conservation Corps. It put those people to work, but people from all walks of life came together who were suffering in the Depression. It was poor, formerly wealthy, and they all had this shared experience. It ended up becoming the most popular program during the Great Depression under FDR. What if we had something like that again? Like a shared common core that everyone came together and helped our infrastructure, helped work together and build our society. Instead of, we send off the poor people to war and wealthy people don't even think about sending their children to the military. Well, I think you're getting
to the crux of the problem then, is that the eviction moratorium will touch communities that will not touch certain socioeconomic status people. So we won't necessarily know or feel it, and it will get worse in certain places. In fact, there was an urban study years ago of Los Angeles, right? And they showed that most people had not crossed their side of the 405 in 3 years or more. That means that like East LA, right, which is the poorer side, and then the west side, which is by the beach, which is for more affluent people, they don't cross over unless they absolutely need to for work or for whatever. You stay in your own socioeconomic community. You stay in your bubble. So what happens to other socioeconomic levels does not affect you. And that's wrong.
Yeah. It was the Civilian Conservation Corps. So thank you for everyone who chimed in on that. Civilian Conservation Corps. It was the most effective of all of FDR's programs to help us get out of the Great Depression. So there you go. My thoughts on that. Let me know your thoughts in the chat below.